Hello and welcome to the Secret Tree of Alchemy series. Today I'm going to be providing more context. This is yet another context video that I'm making on the Secret Tree of Alchemy, focusing in on Pisces high and the Aeon trump quite a bit. Seems like I can't get away from it. This first image that I'm going to bring up here, this is something that I created over a couple decades ago, and I modified it so that a lot of the incorrect ideas that I entertained back then temporarily are removed. But I believe I posted this on my website at the time, Orange Space on GeoCities, which no longer exists. And I got some color code up here, which is somewhat satisfactory, but not really all that satisfactory. It's not exactly what they use. For example, purple is more of a Sagittarius thing, and I used a red and white because it's associated with scouting for Sagittarius. And it's kind of not a bad color coding, but it's informative at the very least, based on what I was thinking at the time. Early in the 21st century, first half decade, which resulted in this little graphic exercise. We got Pisces high all the way up at top in kind of a light brown color with, it looks like gray, number 12. That's where I'm focusing quite a bit of attention, but also Aries in black background and red number 1 there, and Taurus in pink background and green number 2. That's not half bad color code though. The X inside the symbol there, that little sigil, that extremely abstract sigil I've got there, symbolizes multiplication, the initiation of it, right? The act, or I shouldn't even say the act, it's the initiation of multiplication or relations, which is what the bull symbolism is in Taurus, right? And of course I got an orange 0 in there because 0 is also as a decimal sequence assignment assigned to Taurus. Okay, it's literally 0 point, as an infinite distant point is the geometry that's assigned there. The geometry that is assigned to Aries is pure singularity, as in single singularity, impossible singularity. It's not something we experience in reality. It has a lot of other ideas assigned to that astrological sign. They're concepts that we can come up with, but they are concepts that lack reality. And because we can think of them, there must be some manner of existence to them. But existence isn't even a proper word because spirits exist. Okay, but whatever this aspect of nature be, I should say, it simply be as singularity itself. In comparison, Taurus is a singularity amongst, infinite multitude. Okay, that's 0 point rather than the approach to the infinite is in the form of infinite distant point. The approach to the infinite, symbolized by Aries, is that of perfectly straight line or grid made up of perfectly straight lines. That's how it can be conceptualized, right? But what we're going to be talking about today is how the tarot is essentially framed up. Okay? So we'll bring up the Aeon here. into view, and we've got this kind of a green frame around the tarot cards, light green, right? Yeah, and you've got symbols in there, right? Okay, a picture frame is a Sagittarius analogy, which makes it quote-unquote vaginal or realistic. Okay, that's why one of the reasons art is so typically so artfully framed up, right? And, sometimes the picture frames are more artful than the art they contain. But in this case, there's some relative abstraction there. It's green, which I think symbolizes it being something alive in reality, right? But there are symbols placed inside the framework. Okay, you've got XX at the top, symbolizing, I believe, 20, the number 20, right? As in the sequence of trump cards that, this card has a place in as the deck is issued in its original packaging from the manufacturer, right? Sequence of cards, okay, but it's part of a frame up, this sequence, which means in relative importance, it's of reduced importance compared with the sequence of ideas or natures associated with astrology as it was originally conceived long ago, right? Then you have the title down here in the bottom, the Aeon, which is typical Sagittarius symbolism. You see it in every introductory card to a movie where the movie distributor shows its logo. It'll show a sigil up high symbolizing them on a Virgo level, and then they'll have a title down low like Warner Brothers or something like that. The Warner Brothers is in comparison a Sagittarius analogy, and that helps establish this frame symbolism as Sagittarius analogy. This is an idea that is presented for you to consider consciously. Okay, that means there is obvious logic on display here. There are ideas represented here in the form of what you might call reasoning of various forms, whether it be, realistic, on realistic terms, or in realistic terms, and also in symbolic terms. Okay, so this becomes like a rather artful sigil, which can become, can find application in various kinds of talismanic magic or other magics or other applications of logic in the world. Other symbols of a more abstract nature are included on the bottom of the frame here. One is symbolic of the fire element, which is likened in alchemy to a tooth, because a tooth destroys or disintegrates materials so that they can be consumed. A fire consumes, right? And it's basically just a triangle. And then over here you got the Hebrew letter Sheen on display here. It looks to me more like kind of like a ship. Okay, like an ancient ship with sails and what have you. But I've talked about that in other videos. But that symbol is also on display inside the tarot card itself, right? As though a ship coming into view over the horizon, maybe 12 miles out of a Solute perspective, right, is as alarming to a group of people on the shore as a volcano eruption is to people living nearby, right? It could be symbolic of either trade or war. Okay, so maybe alarm isn't the best choice of words. It's a potential choice of words, but maybe also anticipation might be appropriate here, right? Trade usually means, goods are arriving that are needed, and then goods that are surplused And the warehouses in towns can find a place to go before they become degraded of quality, right? Or inequality. But this frame up situation here is important for a number of reasons, okay? Because these ideas that are contained in the frame, for one reason or another, are applied deliberately to the symbolism. Okay, that means human intention and related action applied these symbols here. For example, on the bottom, the Aeon, a specific language was applied. And of course, the word trumps down there written is kind of a part of the frame up in general. These are trump cards. This one is the Aeon. So the more dark and clear and smaller the writing is, the more specific things are, right? So we got specific symbolism at work here. We got a number up top, and we've got a linguistic expression down in the bottom of the frame. These are all linguistic expressions down the bottom of the frame, but mathematics and numbers, right? Numeric value, that is also an application of linguistics. Okay, the symbolism down the bottom and the number up top are what are known as compact symbolic language, which is a mathematical term normally. It's something to be studied when studying algebra, as Descartes finalized that particular style of terminology, right? So on the bottom we have a face value linguistic expression, the Aeon, in a specific language, English, and somehow that English language is associated with this rather, shall we say, Egyptian or ancient symbolism, okay, which emphasizes, this being the Tarot of the Egyptians, right? So it emphasizes ancient Egyptian expressions as filtered through English culture in modern times, right? But these other symbols down at the bottom are more abstract and symbolic at the same time, right? There can be a complex assignment of ideas to these symbols as a result. They are basically sigils, okay? Sigil symbolism, as typically applied to in talismanic magic of one kind or another. Now, the one on the left, the sheen symbol, that's a letter from the Hebrew language. Now, in numerology, this becomes important because there's, Hebrew expressions in numerology, and there are gematria. That's basically what it is. It's the Hebrew variation on that. There's gematria expressed with these cards, English and Hebrew. But I won't get into that specifically. That's kind of a side issue that I have to actually go and start referencing books over to try and get back in tune with that whole practice. My use of numerology in life tends to be rather simple and, astrological. And I like to reduce numbers down to their basic principles that are embodied in the digits, and then work my way back out again to other numeric expressions of symbolism. So now I got to get back into a negative frame of mind here that I woke up with this morning thinking on this subject, because I have a tendency with these cards to think in terms of natures. You could think of Taurus as a specific nature that expresses an analogy applied at that level of natural consideration, right? The same with Sagittarius or Capricorn. The astrological signs are expressive of natures in analogy form, as analogy finds application in logical consideration and symbolic consideration. Just how analogy tends to work the mind and with reality, right? That's what astrology started out as, and that's powerful astrology. What astrology has become since then is largely disinformation. And I won't get into that whole consideration in detail here. But this frame up is something that is easily weaponized here. Okay, these are applied ideas. Some of the ideas find, application in the imagery and the trump cards. I don't have a complete handle on all of these expressions, but I'm in a good position to ferret them all out over time, just looking at the imagery in these cards. I'm a bit dependent on other people who have studied traditional attributions to this symbolism. I think recently the individual that I was going to make use of just disappeared from YouTube, so I'm going to have to start all over finding somebody who's got a really good handle on all these traditional attributions so I can include them in my videos. Many of the traditional attributions I left behind over a couple decades ago. In fact, a quarter century ago, when I latched onto this system and just never stopped studying it. So in order to ground other people's understandings in this, it helps to have a handle on the traditional attributions assigned to these images, right? But the application of fire here in the symbolism of this card is, given the nature of this card, which symbolizes solute perspective, okay, as in from another dimension, from out of another dimension, as though a spirit of another dimension watches us, right? The application of fire here is very directly expressive of something that potentially, at least likely, is an example of weaponization, okay? And for example, the application of the fire element here takes on volcanic proportions in the naturalistic symbolism included in this card, but also there is intent and there is related action of that nature associated with the imagery in this card on the part of somebody maintaining solute perspective who is, shall we say, symbolically speaking, 1,000 miles away, but also right there in your, as Jimi Hendrix would say, your picture frame. This out-of-body presence, this ghostly figure symbolizing astral projection into your reality from somewhere else. Okay? The consciousness projecting itself from solute perspective is, together they represent one consciousness. That has the same effect on maybe your life or your reality that a volcano does as it erupts, close enough to be potentially lethal or merely maybe life-changing. But then life-changing can be, debilitating, right? Or life change can be debilitating. So it could be severe life change symbolized by this card, and also in a weaponized sense. So it's important to remember these symbols in the frame are part of the frame up in modern times through the 20th, at least the second half of the 20th century into the 21st century. Okay. The imagery in these tarot cards is a modern frame-up of imagery that's been around for thousands of years with people, with human beings, to include astrology, which has been around, in my view, dating back into prehistory. Okay, the system I'm studying strikes me as being prehistoric in its development. And then, of course, something also that has been commandeered in more modern times and then weaponized in the interest of the war that is politics, right? That whole concept of politics and war make this card particularly Machiavellian in nature. Okay, you're looking at Machiavellianism here as it potentially finds expression. Okay, there is an individual in this card seated as though an emperor, as though maybe this individual successfully seated themselves there from out of a hanged man's perspective of some kind. But that hanged man's perspective, we don't necessarily see in this card unless, I start to clue into it somehow. I'm not going to write the idea off altogether, but it's not immediately obvious that there's hanged man symbolism in this card, but there is symbolism in this card similar to what you find in the Emperor. And then the Emperor and the hanged man together are assigned to Aries as the only two cards in that particular stack. And there are a lot of practical reasons such as the case. The same goes for Taurus. There are only two cards assigned to that particular stack of cards, okay? Including the trump card that actually has a decimal sequence number assigned to it in the form of 0, which means no numeric value is assigned here. But it is a placeholder in mathematics, as, a placeholder in numeric expression, all right? That represents no value assigned here, all right? So, yeah, and then Aries is a whole different expression, almost opposite expression of the idea of there being no value. Simply no value. In practical terms, in realistic terms, in reality terms, in experiential terms. Whatever's there, it simply be. And whatever that being is, we can think in terms of, especially in abstract terms, and sometimes, and to a degree, missing the point entirely, much of the time, symbolic terms. But in practical terms, just forget it. There are no practical expressions of Aries. There are practical expressions of the other astrological signs in an attempt to emulate impossible ideas that are assigned to Aries. Very often these are political ideas, such as the concept of pure dominance, or even less specifically political, pure energy. Okay? So, yeah, these are weaponizable ideas, but the weaponization is largely concentrated into the frame up here, which influences the imagery expression in the card, but the cards are still effectively available to people on a tarot image level for naturalistic studies, which is what I like to do with them. Studying nature into the metaphysical, or the purely philosophical, from out of, established scientific perspectives, if they're reliably and validly established, which every individual has a right to discern for themselves, I might add. So compulsory science is every bit a violation of human rights as is compulsory religion, or any type of compulsory cultism. Okay, cultism can be studied in naturalistic terms, I might add. But in naturalistic terms, at a most fundamental consideration, cultism is a matter of shared enthusiasm and shared information, and on very much a voluntary basis. Okay, so the concept of cultism and cults are not automatically antisocial. In fact, they're very social. But in rendering them antisocial, there are organized criminal interests and related actions associated with that render considerations and actions and intentions associated with cultism, specific cultism, compulsory. And because they're rendered compulsory, they are also rendered destructive and inducive of neurosis. in Freudian terms, but also Wilhelm Reichian terms. If you really want to get into studying the nature of neurosis, Freud combined with Wilhelm Reich is where you would start, and very productively, because neurosis is a reality. Some people have no choice but to contend with the very harsh reality of it. And they have no choice but to be very honest with themselves over the issue, compared with other expressions of neurosis in the world where people can find a kind of borderline criminal to criminal contentment over the issue. By borderline criminal, I'm really thinking in terms of somebody who is even more shallow than criminal mentality, right? Even claiming spiritual orientation for themselves, though they make no real progress engaging in such consideration day to day. They pretty much just cling to a rock that you might call a cross until death finally overtakes them, right? But I won't get too far into that consideration, that discussion. So the symbolism in the Aeon here is like an expression of deliberately invoked volcanism, okay, as expressive of the Aeon supposedly, enacted into reality at the beginning of the 20th century and is supposedly, finalizing its hold upon the world in the 21st century, right? And one word that comes to mind as a key word in relation to all this is, of course, communism, as expressive of the fire element deliberately weaponized. The whole concept of a gulag system as, a kind of oblivion for people, where they are worked to death. Chances of them getting out of the gulag are slim at best. The more a commune resembles a gulag, the more difficult it is to leave the gulag behind. And this is typically what you run into with destructive cultism, right? You become entrapped in it, and it is very communistic in nature. Socialistic, communistic, quasi-shallow religious, in the same sense that the shallow religions of our time are, or they find expression in the world, right? Cultic expression that they can't even admit to themselves as being cultic. The word cult has taken on negative connotations, and increasingly so into modern times. So this frame up here is where these weaponized ideas have been applied. Okay, we've got sheen down here, which to me, the more I study into it, resembles an ancient sailing ship. So both trade and war can be weaponized. So people are always a bit tense when such activities are taking place. You got foreigners, on your land for one reason or another. They're either fighting you or they're influencing you, and even through trading with you. And then you got this very simple and abstract symbol over here, the triangle, which can be combined with the upside down triangle of the water element, right? To become an air elemental symbol in the hexagram, or the six pointed star of David, expressive of Virgo most strongly in the secret tree of alchemy, in the astrological symbolism. A very common form of talisman, right? Same as a cross. It's a talismanic expression of a sigil worn in the form of jewelry. So these simple symbols are easily adapted into talismans, right? jewelry expressions of talismanic magic. So, very often that kind of magical expression easily finds weaponization. It doesn't have to be weaponized. Even something like an ankh doesn't have to be weaponized in my view. It just captures a range of symbolism that touches base with what one might call garment district thinking in the form of a ceremonial robe typical of certain expressions of cultism, which in our time mostly find negative expression as Capricorn or goat or Baphomet level networking and secret keeping and ritual activities, which I think have been, shall we say, turned into a theme of modern times that shows up in movies and also news media relating to traumatic events involving mass murder and serial murder and related ritual activities, for example, with the Son of Sam murders. You have the children cult involved with that, and they've also operated in North Dakota through John Carr, in his relationship with David Berkowitz. And I won't get too far into that. But, this whole thing with weaponization, it finds ease of expression right here in the Sagittarius and, framing things up. Okay, this is where we get into the analogy associated with framing someone for criminal activities, right? It's a Machiavellian process. And in particular, this card you could think of as the top of the dark personality pentad. You could place Machiavellianism right at the top because it's top-level dark personality, finding expression politically, in war, and in such activities as framing someone up. How to frame someone. You need some kind of solute perspective over that individual to be able to successfully do so, to frame them for a crime, for example. But then you have other expressions within the dark pentad, which in scientific terms is either a dark tetrad or a dark triad. Or the scientists haven't gotten into masochism yet, at least as part of this consideration of dark personality. Though I think some psychologists have studied the combination of sadism and masochism, which are two aspects of what I call the dark pentad. I would place those two aspects right on the bottom. Or maybe it would be better to place them in the arms of the five-pointed star or pentagram that would symbolize a dark, a talented expression of dark personality. All right, a right side up pentagram. And of course, a right side up pentagram does not have to symbolize anything negative, but it can symbolize a supreme expression of negativity where Machiavellianism is right at the top. So this Machiavellian expression of symbolism here also happens to be located at the very top of the secret tree of alchemy, as it is expressed in kind of a sigil that I put together back in 1998, 1999 time frame that I published for the first time on the first day of spring in 1999, which I still use today in my videos. It's got 13 natures expressed as a collective unification, which is a Cancer analogy, or another expression for it would be a set of ideas, or a matrix even of ideas. And the matrix aspect is fed power and life via analogy in a manner exactly the same as what is done typically with long-term memory and the function of intelligence in relation to memories and ideas finding a place in your life, all on their own, it seems like, sometimes, quite often anyway. We're talking about absolution on a practical level here, not merely just an empty ritual of a confession and what have you. I've discussed absolution in other videos on my channel on BitChute called Integrity Alchemy. It's also called Integrity Alchemy, same as my YouTube channel. I've been discussing absolution quite a bit recently as a practice and as a natural phenomenon. A range of phenomena associated with, I guess. But in this dark personality pentad that I've been arriving at, it's a philosophical orientation because it's not all supported by science as of yet, largely because science just hasn't gotten around to studying masochism yet. At least as far as collecting data is concerned, and as far as I know anyway. I could be wrong about that. But if you place sadism and masochism at the bottom of the pentagram, you would then place narcissism and psychopathy up at the top of the two arms of the pentacle, right? So on the left side, anatomical position speaking, you would have narcissism, and maybe on the bottom you would have sadism on the same side. And then over on the right side, maybe you would have sadism, not sadism, but psychopathy up high, the right hand of the pentacle. And maybe masochism down below the right leg. You would think of narcissism and sadism as emotional dispositions in this case, right? As initiatives established in the personality that result in forms of expression, maybe. But you could say the same thing about masochism. You could push masochism over to the other side there. Well, see, narcissism on the left side, on the bottom, then maybe masochism's more appropriate for the bottom side of the left side, and then sadism for the bottom right-hand side of the pentacle, and then up high you would have psychopathy. That's probably more appropriate. They're starting to get into studying sadism these days on a scientific level in relation to this whole issue, actually using statistics for behavioral scientists, kind of an orientation on the subject. So we have a dark personality expression here, but it emphasizes the very top of what I would call the dark personality pentad. Machiavelli is at the top. It's very difficult, it seems like, for most people to take into consideration unless they've read one of Machiavelli's books, which I have not done all the way through yet, I might add. I don't want to sound like I've read his books. I've got his books. I've been studying him rather indirectly, we'll just say that, through psychology so far. And I'm not a detailed expert on this subject enough. It seems like there's never enough expertise on anything, but that I'm studying outside the context of the Secret Tree of Alchemy, which has been my major focus for a quarter century now, and going over a quarter century now. 26 years this fall. So, yeah, as far as people who are actually talking to the public is concerned in face value language, I'm about the expert on this subject that's available. which I realize is something that can be weaponized or leveraged so, but I will simply make the statement that I am not weaponizing this understanding or trying to leverage on people exploitatively. All right. What else to consider here? The frame up I've talked about. When I woke up this morning, I was in a bit of a rage almost. I wanted to get, hot on to making this recording, but then I got into doing artwork, and since then I've been in a more contemplative mood, and I'm more in the mood to discuss nature right now, right? So I got to get back into the negative frame of mind where things are weaponized and conspiratorially so, I might add. So this winds up being a conspiracy genre video to a degree. Okay, so the feet touching the sheen down there on the bottom, because I'm going to be discussing these symbols in detail here pretty quick. I managed to take notes from a certain individual's video that he posted on YouTube enough to be able to talk about everything in detail. So I'll do so in that video, taking into account traditional attributions to these symbols in my own discussions of Secret Tree of Alchemy attributions. Hopefully I'll minimize the quoting and maximize the paraphrasing. I think that's everything I wanted to discuss on this particular subject. This is turning out not to be all that long a video. Just remember, this frame here around all these tarot cards symbolizes ideas that have been attached. So this number at the top on the frame here symbolizes an attempt at kind of encrypting the arrangement of the cards so that it acts kind of as a blind, but it can still be informative to a degree, but more likely along the lines that you would consider to be Kabbalistic rather than Secret Tree of Alchemy. Secret Tree of Alchemy is way more powerful a consideration and orientation than is Kabbalah. Kabbalah is like, if you were to liken the Secret Tree of Alchemy to a virus, the Kabbalah is like a weakened or damaged virus. Okay. So there's information encrypted into Kabbalah and such related to Kabbalah, but it tends to draw its power from how it relates to the Secret Tree of Alchemy, which is mind-bogglingly simple in its expression. The way, the mind is, the way the mind functions is reflected in the Secret Tree of Alchemy. And the Secret Tree of Alchemy is a much freer system of thought, okay? Simply because it takes into account analogy to a complete degree, at least as far as humans are capable of considering such. And the strength of your mind tends to dictate how well you can make use of a reality map like the Secret Tree of Alchemy. So you can liken these frame-ups here around these tarot cards as effectively overlays, right? They've overlaid ideas on top of the original reality map that comprises the Secret Tree of Alchemy. And whenever you're working with maps in military circumstances, back in the day, you used to take literal plastic sheets and lay them over the top of a map and then start working with your little wax pencil to make an overlay that describes a specific military operation. Well, this is what's going on here with these frames around the cards, only some of the ideas are militant or can be interpreted as so. Some of the other ideas are simply associated with linguistics. And linguistics is a Sagittarius consideration, same as an imagining or logic application in the form of a procedure, for example, where there's a priority of work associated with it. Anything your conscious mind is taking under consideration, it does so in the realm of Sagittarius, which is where the ego functions. hopefully with strength, resilience, and health associated with it. And with that, I will leave you there. Thank you for listening. Also, the considerations of the Aries and Taurus cards here. All right. The reason those are important here is because they relate very closely to the Aeon, okay? They have the symbols that have been applied to them in the frame up of their imagery that are elemental in nature. In the case of the Fool, you're talking about the air element, symbolized by a triangle with a line in it. And with the Hanged Man, you're talking about the upside down triangle used to symbolize water element. Okay. The reason this is important is because they chime in with the fire element symbol as it is applied to the Aeon, which is a right side up triangle symbolizing a tooth. You could think of, in my view at least, the upside down triangle as being the tooth on the opposite side of the mouth. All right. This is the same idea as putting both the right wing and the left wing of politics together under your control, symbolized by Virgo, right? In the center of the tree. The top part of the tree, in general terms, is symbolized by solar symbolism, with the sun being placed right in the center of it in Gemini. The bottom half of the tree, in comparison, is lunar symbolism, with the moon actually being, in my view, assigned most specifically to Sagittarius, right smack in the center of the bottom of the tree. But right in the middle of the entire tree, there is Virgo, which combines the water element with the fire element, okay? The fire element's actually assigned, though, to Sagittarius, and the water element, in comparison, is assigned to Gemini. These are both functional considerations. And then you have a functional consideration of the air element from a self perspective in Virgo. Okay. Now, these are self-orientations. They're not the traditional assignments of the elements to the astrological signs, which are situation orientations, right? Situation considerations. When you're thinking in astrological terms, the self-orientation has been, shall we say, veiled. Now, getting back to Taurus and Aries, okay, the Fool is being used, okay, framed up, so to speak, using air elemental methodologies from out of a solute perspective, and that solute perspective is symbolized by the Aeon on top of the tree. Okay, for whatever reason, they've decided to weaponize the air element out of Taurus. That means focused attention, focused vision, okay? That means vampirism, both in and out of body. When vampirism is practiced, it is practiced with the eyes, focusing. Sometimes you see it in movie symbolism where you'll see somebody who plays the fool, so to speak, in the movie, opening up their eyes very wide, even just for a brief instant. And that's mysterious symbolism you see in movies sometimes. Sometimes you don't perceive it taking place. Other times they make it so obvious that it has to be perceived, but then not understood. It relates to vampirism. So vampirism is most effectively practiced from a solute perspective in relative terms. Now, getting over to Aries, we're looking at the water element here. Okay, weaponized, framed up as part of that symbolism in the Hanged Man. Okay, the water element does not naturally apply to the Hanged Man. Okay, the Hanged Man is what you would call fire symbolism because this is assigned to Aries. In fact, the most extreme expression of fire symbolism in the tarot is the Emperor, which is the Aries trump card, whereas I believe the Hanged Man is the Neptune trump card. ruler of the underworld kind of a deal, or the deep sea depths kind of an underworld analogy that is lost to complete darkness, right? Aries symbolism is very much wrapped up in the completely dark fire element that is completely destructive, or complete oblivion, or pure energy, or pure dominance, as people attempt to emulate these impossible ideals assigned to Aries, right? When you talk about wrathful gods, for example, that's an attempt to emulate Aries. Even though Aries is not wrathful, it's simply removed from reality completely. There is nothing there, but what are you really saying when you say that, right? When you think in terms of an object, what is an object? Well, ancient times, people, you might say, prehistoric people thought in terms of spirits. Spirituality is in everything, right? Every object has a spirit, or is a spirit, okay? It's tangible to us because we are spirits, but there are other spirits that are intangible to us. They have a solute perspective relative to us, and we are solute relative to them, but they have an advantage over us if they can perceive us, right? Sense us or perceive us. A sensation, of course, happens in the perception, in the brain. That's why I'm confusing those terms a little bit here. Sometimes I get a little confused over my application of those terms still, even though I've studied, the issue in school to get my degree in psychology, Bachelor of Science degree, or Bachelor of Arts degree, sorry, not science, but arts. For a reason, it's a Bachelor of Arts degree. Has to do with practice. Okay, psychology is a practice, just like art is a practice. When you're practicing an art, the idea is to be truly effective, so that, there's a certain amount of soundness to your practice that makes it true, makes your actions fully justified. And of course, with psychology, you're talking about in social settings, right? And ethical science, for example, is a social setting of sound practice, where the actions are all justified and relative to everyone involved, right? But that's a side to get caught up in, which is what I'm doing, I guess. Now, the weaponization of the water element seems to have taken the form of various forms of intelligence networking where people are kept under compulsory control, symbolized by the hanged man, right? The upside-down Ankh is also a hanged man, as pictured in the Crowley Thoth Tarot, or Egyptian Tarot version of the hanged man. Okay, there's a snake there that symbolizes Capricorn. Snakes, dogs, goats, rabbits typically symbolize Capricorn as they show up in movie symbolism even. But of course, that upside down Ankh is an upside down garment, which implies an upside down person. So one person under compulsory control of some kind takes control over another person, who must then engage in practices that you might call OPSEC practices, or operational security practices, right? In order to just survive. Okay, they have to keep secrets, in other words. So this is secret networking taking place, as symbolized by the hanged man. This is how secret networking is typically conducted into modern times, from out of, ancient practices such as the Order of the Assassins and earlier even. This is where you get into occultism, right? The practice of that which is occult or hidden. Okay, there are things that are hidden in nature because of their relative solute perspective relative to us, and there are things that are hidden in practice because the intention is for such to be the case, and the acts associated with, actions and activities associated with, are kept secret. And evidence is controlled via networking, so you have limited access at best to their information that they control. associated with, their activities in the world. One of the things you do to ensure operational security is blackmail someone. Okay, the black aspect of it is an Aries analogy. The male aspect of it is Capricorn analogy. Okay, when you show somebody a blackmail photograph of, incestuous activities, for example, you're showing them a Capricorn analogy. All right, from out of the black or out of the secret networking. That is, does its best to emulate Aries in its idealism and its practices, right? Just being utterly and completely secret. And they've been largely successful. There are certain forms of blackmail practice that remain secret up till now, at least, to this day. And sometimes cover operations are sacrificed in order to maintain those secrets so that the attention of the public through the media is focused on, for example, Jeffrey Epstein or Weinstein in Hollywood. People like that become the focus of attention. And those activities are effectively cover operations because people are less alarmed about, Epstein compared with what they would be alarmed over if they knew 9-year-old girls were being used in blackmail pornography productions, right? So, people would get seriously alarmed if they found out about these activities going on, in which they do discuss in movie syncs in symbolic terms only. For example, movies like Longlegs 2024 release this past summer, that's all about the truth behind trafficking, or a specific truth behind trafficking, what is known as trafficking in the United States in the form of human sex trafficking, right? The emphasis in that movie is on being 9 years old and caught up in these kinds of activities. Deborah Spencer, I think her name was. I Don't Like Mondays, mass murder at the school. December 1979, in my view, would be an example of somebody caught up in this kind of blackmail networking, out of, incest context, incestuous context, okay? You evaluate the property upon which she lived, the house and its situation next to a school. It is, easy for somebody to just walk right up her driveway and get Polaroid pictures from the perspective of her bedroom window of her and her father together in that bedroom. The same window out of which she fired that .22 caliber Marlin semi-automatic rifle at the school right across the street. A school which is closed at night, I might add, so you don't have to worry about across the street neighbors noticing you walking right up to her bedroom window wearing your Zodiac killer hood and carrying your Polaroid camera, right? The Zodiac killer hood is garb used for this purpose. That's why the Zodiac killer wore it. And with that, I will say goodbye again. Another issue that just came up, symbolically speaking, is I kind of figured out the hanged man perspective hanging over the head of the seated figure in the Aeon here. It strikes me as being quote-unquote Indian network, symbolized by the red dot on the forehead of the Pisces image. It's kind of a fish, yet it's got wings, and it's shaped like a human head, and it's got the goddess Newt for a hairdo, and then it's got the red dot right in the forehead. So somehow, English culture and Indian culture being combined together is expressed here in networking form.